All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. I am recording from my second home of the pantry. I'm recording on the internet, which is, I guess, the home of the show now due to the situation everyone's been in for the past few years. But yeah, I have a guest on this episode who's someone who hasn't been on the show before. And it's funny. I've been doing this for more than 9 years now, and the amount of musicians with connections to Manitoba that I haven't had on the show, it just seems like I can never catch up. No matter how many of these I do, there's always people that I've been wanting to talk to that I just haven't had a chance to. So I think this checks off one of the boxes of someone whose music I've been aware of for a long time and have been curious about and wanted to talk to on the show. And I'm glad we made this happen because, we'll get into it. But you have some really interesting projects going on. So to start this off, before we get into any of that stuff, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and maybe give a bit of background about what it is you do as a musician.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Sam. I am Little Miss Higgins, and or if you know me off stage, I'm also, my first name is Jolene Higgins, and then last name Higgins, and yeah, I make Manitoba my home now, and though I'm not from here, but
Yeah,
it's where I hang my hat and throw everything else on the floor, and yeah, I it's great. It's amazing the amount of even before I lived here, the influence that Manitoba musicians had on me,
sure.
and yeah, and then I got pulled here.
Well, maybe that's a good place to start because it seems like one of the recurring themes of these interviews is trying to define what it is about Manitoba's music that makes it. What is the draw to the music here? Because there's something very specific, whether it's country, whether it's hip hop, whether it's metal, folk, anything. There's something uniquely, weirdly Manitoba about it. And maybe as someone who came here, by choice,
Mm-hmm.
what is it about the music here that, or the music scene here that sort of drew you in?
It was times changed. The High and Lonesome Club,
Yeah,
like for sure, that was the um, that was the first place I played here in Manitoba. I had met John Scholes years before in Chicago at the Chicago Blues Fest,
oh cool.
and through a guy I was dating at the time, a keyboard player, Graham Guest, and he and John were great friends. And we actually just ran into him on the street, and I met him. And then years later, I started performing, and I'm like, I heard about Times Changed, and so I contacted him, and I'm like, I don't know if you remember me, but we met on the street in Chicago years ago, and now I'm doing my own thing, and he said yes right away. I don't know why, but he said yes. So I have him partially to blame for this and for my life,
Well,
and and then just all the musicians that have gone through that club, like Big Dave McLean and the D Rangers,
yeah,
and just I like just so many, Andrew Neville and the Poor Choices, and so I listening to that music was just so in like it influenced me, and it encouraged me to want to keep doing it, and knowing that it was possible, and like especially Big Dave McLean was he took me under his wing, and you know put me in a few headlocks, and forced me to play his guitar a few times, at jams across the country, and yeah, like that was definitely a foundation for me. And then meeting the F holes, and I met Jimmy James Fraser, the trumpet player of the band, in a lineup for the bathroom at times. And he said, he's like, hey, I'm Jimmy James. I'm playing a few bands around the city, and I really love your music. And I said, well, I'm playing again tomorrow night. Do you want to come and sit in with us? And he's like, sure. I told my band at the time, and they're like, what? Do you know if he's any good? I'm like, I don't know. He he looked good, and he looked the part. He's in this like three-piece,
yeah.
suit with his little pork pie hat, and he's got his little pencil mustache, and I'm like, I think he can play. And so, and then I got to know him and the rest of the band, and I'm like, they're so good. I'm like, they would be the perfect band for me, and then yeah, they said, I asked them if they wanted to be my band, and they said yes, and we ended up recording an album together and doing some touring. And then I realized how hard it is to tour with a 6-piece band.
Sure.
And things, you know, to make it sustainable for all of us was challenging. But I mean, I still have a relationship with those guys, and I call on them when I need them, and well, I live with the banjo player. I fell in love with the banjo player, and he's probably the main reason I moved to Manitoba. But it made sense regardless, like, to come here. Yeah,
I like
there's
that.
Something about it, and there's something. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I like that story. It's. I mean, a lot of the time when people from outside of Manitoba come here, it often isn't a positive story. Just for some reason they ended up here through weird circumstances. But you have actually like a nice reason to become a Manitoban. I like it. It's a happy one for once.
Well, I find it, this convergence of like, I'm big on land and the prairies, and I tried to live on Vancouver Island years ago, and that just didn't work out for me. I was like, I can't walk on the ocean. I can't drive on the ocean. Whereas in the prairies, you can just drive forever, and I'm big on country drives. And so I find, though, like, this, because I ended up in Saskatchewan for 10 years, and I would go up north of Saskatoon to the Ness Creek Music Festival there, and into the boreal forest, and I was like, what is this? This is beautiful. This is amazing. The lakes and the trees and the people that live up there and make the Ness Creek Music Festival happen are just amazing. And so coming to Winnipeg and learning about the land and the connection to the boreal forest and the shield, and then the rivers, and then the prairie, and is such an interesting place. And then the history that's here is even more fascinating, and the people that are here. And I love it. I love that this next chapter for me has been, oh God, I've been here for 8 years now. I've gone through a few chapters here, it seems. But yeah, I love it. I love this place. It's a wonderful, interesting, unexpected place for me. I wasn't expecting it, and I really appreciate what I've learned coming here, and how I've grown as a person. And yeah.
Cool. That's a great answer. And I mean, I could talk about Manitoba all day because I'm kind of obsessed with Manitoba as a place, and for many of the same reasons that you've said. And I mean, I wouldn't have been doing this show for as long as I have if I didn't, have this fascination with the culture here, even as someone who's from here. But I think that so we don't just talk about Manitoba the whole time. You have a really exciting project that you've been working on, and it seems extremely ambitious. So when I first read about it, I was the number of different aspects of it is really cool, and it's more than just an album. It's a whole story and a podcast, and I think that you should probably explain how this thing came about, because it seems like this really ambitious project. I don't know if it came about during this time when everyone's sort of trying to figure out how to use their creativity because they can't do the normal shows and things like that, or if it has roots earlier. What's the origin of this?
Well, first of all, it's called the Fire Waltz, and it comes from a family story of mine, and I'd heard these stories of my great grandmother on one of my great grandmothers on my dad's side throughout the years growing up. And as I got older, I got to hear more details,
Okay.
the gritty details, and um, and I was always fascinated by this woman who I never met, but I loved these stories and the pictures, and there are postcards and letters about this story and her story. And so I'll just quickly explain, like
Sure.
she was born in France, grew up on Jersey Island in between, like in the English Channel, in between
Yep.
Britain and France. And she got married to a man, my great grandfather, Francois Milou. And her family, the rest of her family, all moved to Canada, to mostly to southern Alberta, and some actually here in Manitoba.
Oh, cool.
And then she was left on Jersey Island kind of by herself. And so her husband, Francois, he was in the French army, and he ended up in the First World War. And then she left.
Okay.
And they had two little girls, and she came to Canada and ended up with her family, her parents in southern Alberta. And so that's kind of the premise of the very start and the premise of the story. And then there's a lot more that goes on with her and another relationship with a man in southern Alberta, and then her husband re-entering the picture, and so I've obviously had to fill in a lot of blanks because we don't know a lot. And I try to incorporate that idea into the show as well, or into the story as well, where it's like not everything is answered. And so but I loved the courage and the strength of this woman, and I wanted to present that because, during a time when, women had few rights and not always a lot of respect.
Sure.
I wanted, I think it's important for us to remember these times and these stories. And so then I'm like, I got to do something with this story. Like, it's just so good. And so I had worked with a group of artists out of Calgary, out of Alberta, years ago on another project. And two of them, one being Chris Demeanor, who's a Calgary poet, musician, actor, and then Eric Rose, who's a theater director at Ghost River Theater in Calgary. I approached the two of them and said, I've got this story and I want to do something with it. I don't know what, but I think it's really great. And so they said yes, and I stole them for 2 weeks and in I think October of 2019, so it was just before, it was before the pandemic, and so initially I thought it was going to be a theater piece.
Okay.
Mostly would just I thought just Chris and I could tell it, and Eric would direct it, and so I brought the story to them, and we sat, and I went to Calgary, and we sat in Eric's dining room and had all these pictures and postcards and letters and the story, and I had done a bunch of writing, and I gave it to them, and so we sat around this dining room table, and we came up with I don't know, a bunch of song titles to tell the story.
Okay.
And so that's how we got through it. And then Chris and I went away. We went to a place called Twin Butte, Alberta, which is there's a little venue there. It's called the Twin Butte General Store and Licensed Mexican Restaurant.
Okay.
And it's this place, I mean, most musicians know it. Most musicians have played there, and it's great. It's amazing. And so my family roots aren't far from there, so I phoned Jenny, who runs the general store, and I said, Jenny, can Chris and I come and write some music there as like a retreat? And she's like, of course. And so we spent there was a blizzard, So we were kind of like storm state in Calgary for a few days, and we wrote like 12 songs. No, we wrote 18 songs in 12 days, and that was the start of it. And we performed those songs, and then we weren't sure what we're gonna do. Like, was it gonna be a song cycle? Was it gonna be a theater piece? And then the pandemic hit.
Of course. Great timing, right?
I know. I'm just like, I'm like, I've got to do something with this because the songs were so strong. We had developed such a strong like through line with the story and started to really develop these characters and be able to express things through them.
Okay.
And so I just started writing because I'm like my tour. Actually, during the pandemic, I was like the March of 2020, and I was on the road. I did one show, which was actually at the Twin Butte General Store. We did one show, and then just the next morning I woke up and it was like shows were just cancel. Plus there was an avalanche in the mountains, so I couldn't get through to the next gig. It was like everything was just like telling me to turn around and go home.
Yeah.
So I came home and I just started writing more and more, like taking these songs and linking them with narration and script.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, so there's three main characters, and Chris and I were I was, kind of taking on the Eva character, my great grandmother, and then there's her husband Francois, but then there was this man, a rancher in Alberta, who she falls in love with,
right?
And his name's Henry. And so he was kind of taking on the two roles, and it was just getting confusing. So we knew we needed a third person. So actually, Matt Foster.
Right on.
You know Matt.
Yeah, I know Matt. Yeah, great guy.
Yeah. So Matt Foster, formerly the Crooked Brothers, one of the members of the Crooked Brothers.
Yep.
I had kind of briefly worked with him at a Saint-Nom project, like a French singing songwriting project, and so he's like bilingual, and I remembered that was kind of tucked in the back of my mind. And so because Francois is a French speaking character,
of course,
bilingual as well, and so he jumped on board with the project and became the Francois character, and then we got together briefly. We were able to come together kind of during the pandemic, during kind of one of the non-wave times.
Yeah, those few little bright spots. Yeah.
little break, and so the four of us came together and we worked on the script, and then we did a bit of recording, and then the music was just sitting there, and we're like, we need to record this music. And so we set up a studio here in this room.
Oh, cool.
That I'm in right now, like in my home studio. And Jamie Sitar, Out of Town Sound, came and set up a recording, kind of remote recording studio. And I just started bringing musicians on board. And, initially I was like, I just want this to be like as simple as possible. But then like Chris is like, no, let's get a band. And I'm like, okay, let's get a band. It's just for the recording at least. And so we brought Joe Fournier and Joanna Miller,
cool,
and as the rhythm section, like killer rhythm section.
Yeah.
And then my partner Eric Lemoyne, like he did a lot of playing, like a lot of guitar, banjo.
Cool.
Throughout the pieces, and a lot, and then it was just like, you know what, I can do whatever I want with this, and so I got Carrie Latimer to put some theremin on a couple of tunes.
Oh, right on. That's awesome.
Rain Hamilton came and played some fiddle, and like Darwin Baker on harmonica, and Alex Campbell came and played some piano, and got James Fraser on trumpet. I was just like, oh, and even last minute, we got Jeremy Ham to come in and play some mandolin. It was like,
cool.
I was just like, why not? we're just, might as well make this what it needs to be. And again, coming back to Manitoba, like that list I just, pronounced, there's this endless sort of just like, oh, we need theremin, oh, we need mandolin, and of course there's these amazing musicians
Yeah,
right
and they're all from
here.
that community, all from that
Yeah,
times change kind of community as well, right?
totally, totally. Yeah.
Cool. What is the kind of you've done all this work, a lot of work, obviously, and you've turned it from a very small project into a very large project with all these people involved, and I mean a lot of really great musicians too. So, but what is the sort of what is the end goal of this? And I guess maybe this is something you're still figuring out because of the pandemic. I'm not sure, but no one really knows when live shows are going to happen again. Hopefully, it's sooner rather than later, but it's all at this point up
Mm-hmm.
in the air, right? So, what? How do you launch something like this when you have the narrative elements and you have the all of these songs and they all tell a story, and we're in this this mess of a situation where the traditional way something like this might be released is off the table, at least for now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I did have some dates, shows booked, you know, this month
Yeah,
and February, and it's like, well, those were like canceled because I'm like, well, what if one of us gets sick?
yeah.
Then we can't keep going. We have to turn around and come home. So I'm just like, meh, we're not even gonna try. I'm just like, so it's unfortunate, but I think this project was. I mean, it was something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I just didn't know that it was going to be this.
Okay.
And I mean, I feel like I'm a storyteller. I have a theater as a background as well as music, and music just kind of took the driver's seat.
Right.
There's many aspects of myself as an artist. Like there's a comedian in the passenger seat, and there's an actor in theater, you know producer in the back seat, there's a tap dancer tied up in the trunk. But like that's just part. And then I've got a trailer full of all kinds of other things. And so I'd been listening to a lot of audiobooks. It's kind of after having a child, I was like, there's no time to read a book, but I
Sure.
found while I'm doing the dishes, I would listen to books, and got into a few podcasts as well. But then I like as I'm listening to these audiobooks, and some of them are fantastic and like fantastically delivered,
Sure.
but it's just one person reading, and I was like, well, like, couldn't you do this kind of like an old radio play? Like, where are those? Like, what happened to the radio play?
With the
And
different voices and the different characters, yeah, voicing themselves and stuff. Yeah,
and
for sure.
the foley, and like
Yeah,
the sound foley, and I'm like, that's what this is gonna be. And so yeah, I mean, and there was even talk of us trying to record all the foley, but then that was that just became an even greater beast that I
I bet.
decided not to tackle. And instead I tackled a smaller beast of like doing all the sound design myself and learning how to make a sound design, which was amazing and fun, and I loved it. And uh, and so yeah, there's this aspect of like old radio play, and some narration and sound, like the sound design,
Hmm.
to help tell the story and take people into a different world. And I think that's what I like as an entertainer. That's that's the end goal, is taking people somewhere else. That escape for whatever it is, half an hour, two
Yeah,
hours, to be able to have that escape. That's we love that. We're like stories are part of us. We love stories.
for
I'm
sure.
sure, as as a father. Like your kids just suck up stories and love them, and I do too. I love listening to stories and I love telling them.
Yeah.
So yeah, even in my songs, like that's always been a big part of my songwriting has been
Hmm.
uh, the story of the song.
Do you
Yeah.
think that this story, I mean, not the particulars, but just the general story, a lot of people can relate to here? Because I mean, I think that a lot of us have great grandmothers who have gone through similar journeys in the sense of coming from, whether the war is involved or not, coming to Canada and starting a
Mm-hmm.
family here, and we have these
Mm-hmm.
ancestors that we know of. I mean, I have some of those too, for sure, that I'm aware of, but I don't know the full story of how they ended up here and why they ended up here, and why I exist as a result of that, right? So do you think that there's kind of some universality in a story like this, where people can kind of maybe connect to their own roots by hearing maybe a similar background to what their ancestors may have gone through?
Sure. Yeah. Like, I mean, it was actually kind of a struggle. I'm just gonna kind of
Sure.
sideline this with, you know, when I first started writing this story, a lot of uh, truth and reconciliation was coming up with Indigenous people,
Yeah.
and so writing a settler story was a bit of a struggle for me because I felt like, do we need to hear this right now?
Yeah.
But I also know that this story isn't about settling the Western Canada. The story
Sure.
is about this woman and her struggle and how she, you know, gets through adversity by, you know, by just like doing what she had to do to like keep her children
Sure.
and get through hard, crazy winters in southern Alberta
Yeah.
and get across the ocean and across Canada with two little girls by herself. And so I hope people can appreciate that. Like the train that she took across Canada, the immigrant trains weren't fancy.
Yeah. Of
Like
course. Yeah.
via rail, they were like box cars with benches in them, and like yeah, and so, but yeah, I think we also we discussed in the creation of it, like addressing these people coming uh, to southern Alberta and to the prairies and seeing the Indigenous people and how do we address that. And I had a whole side story going on, which actually turns out it's going to be season 3
Oh, cool.
of the Fire Waltz, because we've we in the creation of this first season, we're like, there's more to these characters, there's more to this story, and so we've got season 2 in the works, and then
Well,
I've got season 3, which is you know so addressing a bit the bigger issue of the Indigenous connection
sure.
to what happened during that time, what was going on. And it's great because like Chris Demeanor has been working on a project called Making Treaty 7, which is Treaty 7 is the land where like south of Calgary, like Calgary
Right.
and south of Calgary, that area where my great grandparents lived, or great great grandparents homesteaded. And so, we wanted to address that. We wanted to not sweep it under the rug
Yeah.
as it has been in the past, but we felt like we couldn't take the whole thing on in this season. So season 3 is going to venture more into that, and she meets this Blackfoot woman and has a relation, like there's a relationship that grows, and
Cool.
the stories will be told that way through her and the Blackfoot woman that she meets, and we'll work with a Blackfoot artist, and I have a dear friend, Janice Weaselbear. She's an executive producer on the project who is Blackfoot. And,
Oh, cool.
So, we're certainly, there's certainly awareness of that. And because, it's like, it's the big elephant in the room. We can't ignore it.
Sure. And I mean, it's an important part of the story of this part of the world too, right? I mean, just the way that those two cultures interacted is such a huge part of it. Yeah.
Totally. And I don't feel that stories in the past yet haven't quite got there yet. I think they're starting to. We're starting to open up and talk about these things and address them and recognize them for what they were.
Yeah.
And what they are. And so it's exciting, and yeah.
Cool. I like how you're already working ahead on season 3. It's good to hear that you haven't waited to see if season 1 will work out yet. It's already moving on 2 seasons in the future. It's great.
I don't care. I'm already writing season 2, and it's happening. I don't care.
That's awesome. So how does someone hear this? I mean, when's it coming out, and then how can someone actually engage with the project?
Right. So the first podcast will be released February 14th. Easy to remember, Valentine's Day. And then it'll be every, I think that's the Monday. So every Monday after that, it'll be released. There's 5 episodes. And then on the March 14th, which is the 5th episode, the full album will be released and available for people to listen. If they don't want, if they just want the songs, they can just have the songs then. But I think the whole project's pretty cool. It's different. Like it's there's music, but then there's script and narration, and it's not musical. It's like,
right.
I don't know what it is. I don't know. The songs are unto themselves and they help tell the story. But again, it's not really a musical. I don't know what it is.
Well, I'm glad it's coming out. I mean, despite the shitty situation everyone's in with the pandemic, assuming the pandemic continues, this is a perfect time for someone to be able to absorb something like that, because people generally have, not everyone, of course, but people generally have more time to sit and then take in a project of that length and of that detail, because we're home, we're not working, or our work schedule has changed, or our work setting has changed. And I think that the timing, despite being bad at the beginning when you couldn't play shows with this, it sort of worked out in the end, in that you have a captive audience who's wanting to hear something, hopefully, of this nature.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and I mean, even before, like I said, I would listen to audiobooks while I did the dishes. And actually, I have it's like a podcasting network. It's just in the works. It's just starting. I have one project on there right now, and then this will be the second project. It's called Dish Duty Dramas and Chicken Coop Comedies.
Cool.
So it's where people can find these projects, and other artists are going to start creating as well. Like it's about, listen to this while you do your dishes, or feed the chickens, or
right on
the floor, because that's when I can listen to this kind of stuff.
Well, I listen to podcasts walking my dog, so I get it for sure. That's you find that time when you're doing something else, and that's the time to listen. If people want to hear some of your other stuff, I know you've released a lot of music in the past. What's the best way to find you online to sort of follow what you're doing and check out your music and this project and everything else?
Yeah, that's so funny. Well, I mean, obviously, everything will be on my website, littlemisshiggins.com. All the links to all the places where music is available, except I think, and I'm at a time where I'm like, well, the whole Spotify thing, I'm like,
yeah,
what do I do? This is my moment to make a decision. Does this go on Spotify or not? And I'm going to say not.
That's a good call.
My other music is there at the moment, but it's gonna, it'll come down and go on to. I think we're gonna go with Tidal. It
Cool.
seems like that's where a lot of people are going, and so we'll go to Tidal and for streaming, and then the podcast will be available through all the other platforms, and then also just everything will be on my website, and you can find it all there, or where basically everywhere but Spotify.
I like that. Right on. Right on.